Greetings, I am Mr. O'Neill. I teach 8th grade English language arts online in Washington State for Stride K12, and I also am one of the advisors for our esports club, which includes chess, among a few other esports. And we'll take a look at the Week 5 regular season for the K12 Esports League. And before we get started, congratulations to the Seattle Seahawks for winning the Super Bowl against the New England Patriots by a score of 29-13 and rocking the Seahawks jersey. Let's go. 12th man. 12th man. There we go. And once again, big win. Congratulations to the Super Bowl champion, Seattle Seahawks. So, from the K12 Esports League homepage, club events, and we'll go right into the Week 5 arena for the winter of 2026 regular season. And Dr. Evilman 12 won this week with 58 points, 15 wins, 1 draw, no losses. Their draw was to I Rickrolled You. They only had 13 wins, but no losses. So just a few less points. And then Tiger 2 Sharp, we've seen them before. Very nice outing. 8 wins, only 1 loss. Paper Player 59, another usual suspect. 9 wins, 5 losses, no draws. Had a 4-game win streak. Heston, a new player on the scene, had a good, strong showing here. 10 wins, 7 losses. Kaismar, we've seen them before. Dream Angels 88, a Piggy Bank 1391, and Trocador the Lemur Jedi, and Viper Active 007. All the rest of these players are usual suspects that we've seen before. The only relatively new player on the scene that we haven't seen in the top 10 in recent memory is this Heston character. And congratulations to everyone who scored in the top 10 for this week. Budgie 10, another really, really strong player, had 6 wins and only 1 loss, and had a 4-game win streak, and they finished in the top 15. And then Michael Keaton, I mean to say INGA James, finished in 14th place with 6 wins and 3 losses. So not too bad from them either. And that's a stronger showing than they've had in the past. And I'm a little bit partial to Michael Keaton and the 1989 Batman. So that's why I mentioned INGDA there. And this is my review, so I get to review who I like. And Murray the Third and Dead Zone 222, another Iron Bat 7, totally not Jason Voorhees, a bunch of other usual suspects that didn't score quite as well as they have in the past, but they still finished in the top 25. And if you take a look at page 2, we had a total of 44 players. And congratulations to everyone who participated in the tournament. And let's review a few games. So the first game I would like to review is this game between I Rickrolled You and Dr. Evilman 12. And this is exactly the same as one of their previous games, but we're going to review it anyway because there's an interesting computer line that I Rickrolled You missed that would have given them winning chances. So if you look at the engine analysis, it says that they both played with 100% accuracy and they both had 14 book moves, and then they repeated by a draw by repetition at the end. So that's why they had no inaccuracies and no good moves. Everything was a book move here, which is really hard to do. Usually you only have book moves for like the first 2 or 3 moves, but to have 14 book moves in a row means they really did their preparation and they really knew what they were doing. And even with this, there was an interesting engine line that I Rickrolled You missed, which we'll get into. So let's get into the game. And again, 100% accuracy for both players, which is pretty impressive that they were able to memorize that specific line. But they are rated very high. So Dr. Evilman 12 is nearly 2,000, and of course I Rickrolled You is over 2,100. So it makes sense that they could memorize a line 14 moves out because they're so highly rated. But let's take a look at this. So we have a King's opening and King's Knight variation according to the engine. So this is gammoning a pawn, but only temporarily, because after takes, there's d4 challenging the center, and the knight goes back. Again, these are all book moves. So takes, white has to win their pawn back. So they just won their pawn back. So now it's back to an even position after white just won their pawn back. And then we have takes. So now white is down by a minor piece, so they got to win their minor piece back somehow. And we have a4. And the point is that the knight is actually trapped. The knight cannot go back to d6, and the knight's best move is here on d4 because it's protected by another knight, but then you also have this double attack. So white's going to win their material back, which is what happens in the game. And then we have another book move, of course, because we're still within the first 14 moves. And then the point is that you can take en passant. And for those of you who are new to chess, you can take this way because when the pawn goes to d5, the pawn had to have been on d6 first. So since the pawn was technically on d6 before it got to d5, then it's completely legal to take en passant here, which is French for in passing, if I remember correctly. So we have the pawn taking on en passant, and en passant only works when these pawns are side by side like this, on the 5th rank and on the 3rd rank. So takes, and then check, or excuse me, blocking the check. And then what happened in the game is they just repeated back and forth. These are all book moves. And then they had a draw. But the line that I rickrolled you missed, which the computer doesn't see right away. So that's why it's hard to see with engine analysis. Okay. But after check, this is the first check, block the check. Instead of going back to d4, you can actually slide the queen back to f3. And the point of putting the queen on f3 is you're keeping an eye on this b7 pawn. And it's really preventing the light squared bishop from developing. Because when the light squared bishop develops, then you're losing a pawn on b7. So you're hindering black's ability to develop their queen side, particularly their light squared bishop. So the point is that after queen goes to f3, this is a really good move. Let's say that black wants to do the most natural move, which is develop their bishop to d6, or possibly e7. It doesn't really make much difference. The point is that white is going to be a little bit faster than black with developing, even with the exchange. You would think that white would lose a tempo by going for this exchange. And let's say that, the natural, this is just natural. Like black wants to take, and then the point is that white has an attack on this undefended c pawn. So black doesn't have time to castle right now. Black has to move the c pawn out of harm's way. And this gives white one extra tempo. And the point is that after the knight develops, then black is going to castle. And you're going to have rook here. And the most natural move would be to slide the queen back. But this is actually an inaccuracy. So if you go back to this position, so this position is completely equal with correct play from black. But when you're playing against a really strong player like Dr. Evaman 12, who's nearly 2000, they are probably not going to offer a queen exchange in the middle of the game. They're going to want to keep queens on the board. So the most natural move would not be to go queen f5, which is correct move. I mean, the most natural move would be just to get the queen out of the way by going to d7. So if even a strong player, if they don't know their stuff here, which they probably won't this deep into the analysis, they would probably just move their queen back to get out of the way of the rook. But the point is that you're not going to actually put your rook on d1. I mean, you would think you would want to put your rook on d1 just to go after the queen, and the queen is running out of squares. But it's actually stronger to go knight to e4 because you're creating a couple of threats here. And see if you can see the threat. Okay, so the threat is really tricky, really tricky. And even strong players probably don't see the threat right away, but it's a brilliant move. Let's say the queen, let's say they, I mean, it could be anything. Like, let's say you move the rook over, you could try to create some loot for black on this side by advancing this pawn, because you maybe you want to try to put your bishop here, and you were just going to create some loot. Like, there's a couple of different moves for black here, but I don't think that a strong player would go for a queen exchange like what the engine wants on g4. I think most strong players would want to keep queens on the board still. So, like, let's say they just try to move the rook over. This is a blunder because, this is coming and the queen is running out of squares. Okay, so, the engine almost wants to sack the queen at first. But let's say you tried to create some luft instead. So your queen can escape to b7. And b7 seems like a safe square for the queen. As you can see, the brilliant move is now f6. And the point is that you're forking the king and the queen, and it looks like a sacrifice, but it's only a temporary sacrifice because after the pawn takes, you've ruined black's pawn structure and you're completely winning here. So the rook is going to lift to a3, and then that's the only winning move. And even with correct play, the rook is going to infiltrate on, well, yeah, there's that. But you could even go here right away, and this is still winning, not as winning. The engine thinks it's an accuracy because the engine wants you to get the queen off, or wants you to block with the bishop first, and then you're going to start an attack. And this pawn's going to eventually advance, move the king to safety. After the pawn advances, you're going to double up. You're just going to start putting a lot of pressure here. And now you can take. So you're going to win your piece back, and you've ruined the pawn structure for black on the king side, and you've won your piece back, and your rooks are extremely active on the d file, and the queen's being attacked. The f-pawns are doubled. So this is winning by 3 points here for white. So interesting line to go into if you are, I rook rolled you and you have another position like this against Dr. Evenman 12. So don't accept a draw. Just go into this interesting line and get a winning position. And I don't think Dr. Evenman 12 would know all the engine theory to be able to fight against this. So good luck. We'll take a look at the next game. And the next game is between Budgie 10 and Dr. Evenman 12. And we have a King's opening and Karo Khan defense, taking up space in the center with d5. Takes, and exchanging the f-pawn for a center pawn is nice because you still have 2 center pawns, and then black only has the 1 center pawn. So you're still controlling the center. And this is a very accurate game by Dr. Evenman 12. So even if Budgie 10 would have played a little bit more accurately, Dr. Evenman 12 probably still wins because they played so accurately here. So bishop is developing, queen's developing, natural to go after this undefended b7 pawn, takes, and then also has this battery. So you got a couple of things going on. You're attacking this undefended b7 pawn, but you also have the battery on this diagonal. So this is what's called an in-between move. You don't have to take the bishop right away on f3 because you can provide a check first. And the bishop can't block the check or capture the bishop back or anything, so it makes sense to have this in-between move. And the king has to move, and then you take. You probably could have castled first, especially since they went king to f8. It puts it right in the rook's path. So the point is that if you castled and then, like, let's say you tried to move the bishop back to safety, obviously you can't go back to h5 because you're just this bishop's going to take from behind. So yeah, so the point is that you've got bishop h5 check, and you're going to win your pawn back. And let's say you block with the knight, then you're just getting checkmated right here. So yeah, you got to be careful. The engine says don't block with the knight because you're getting checkmated. The engine says block with the queen, and then you're just losing your queen to the rook, which is almost as bad and completely winning. So that's the line. They didn't go into that line of castling. They just took with the g-pawn instead, so it was a small inaccuracy there. So it wasn't quite a perfect 100% accurate game for Dr. Evenman 12, but it was close. But taking with the f-pawn, or taking on f3, is slightly inaccurate compared to castling, and then you've got the rook on f1 applying more pressure on the f-file against the with x-ray vision against the king. So the rook is going to slide over, and then the bishop's going to develop. Going after the bishop, which they're happy to take. But the point is that you're getting the shish kebab pin, the royal pin, queen pinned against the king on the dark squares. So takes, and it made sense to take with the knight there because the knight was under attack. But by this point, Dr. Evenman 12 is winning by 4 points after the exchange. And then it's just a matter of converting the position. So the idea is to exchange as much as possible to simplify the game. So you could just take the knight right here, and the engine likes taking the knight to simplify the position. But Dr. Evenman 12 doesn't go for this. They go for the check instead. And then here comes the queen for delivering checkmate on g7. They block the checkmate on g7 with moving the bishop, and then the rook is activated. Have to move the queen. The knight's not being defended, and that's also takes with check. That simplifies the position. Takes. Now you've got some more back rank problems on the 8th rank and on the 7th rank, and they don't see the checkmate, and there you go. There's checkmate to end the game. Good game from Dr. Evenman 12. And congratulations to him for getting a great win. And next game we have Budgie 10 against a Piggy Bank 1391. King's opening. Taking control of the center. Takes. Knight develops to c3. So they do take, and then the point is that if you take like this, it's a little bit worse because you don't have a pawn on the e-file anymore to support. So this is more of an inaccuracy. But like if you did have a pawn on e3 or e4 or e5, if you had any pawns on the e-file, then the double pawns look bad, but they would still be kind of supporting the center. So then you do want to take with the queen, which is what happens in the game. And it keeps your pawn structure intact. Knight takes on d4, which is what happens in the game. And then they do find the pin, but that's still a mistake because of knight to f5, which Budgie 10 finds. It's a great move. It's the only winning move. And it's forking the bishop and the queen. So the queen has to move out of the way. Of course, the queen can't go here because the knight's covering. The queen can't go here because, well, the queen could move up to try to protect the bishop. But you're still going to take no matter what. And the queen is safe here relatively. I mean, there is some potential for like a discovered attack this way, but you just lost a minor piece and you're not going to be able to take it back because the knight's being defended by the pawn. So the queen has to move somewhere, and that is the best move, queen sliding over to f3. But after takes, you're just down by a minor piece, down by 4 points, so a minor piece plus a pawn. And then Budgie 10 is happy to start exchanging to simplify. That's an undefended pawn. Doubling up on the c-file, getting ready to infiltrate. That is a shish kebab pin. The rook is pinned against the king. And instead of taking the rook right away, they're just applying pressure to the queen. So good move. And the queen is still being attacked because knights can move backwards. So there goes the queen, and then the game is shortly going to be done. That is a fork, but it's too little too late because Budgie 10's already winning by 16 points. So take with check, have to move, queen comes in, knight wants to come back in, missed checkmate in one move, queen to g3. Checkmate in one. Takes. Check. Checkmate. Good game from both players, and Budgie 10, congratulations on winning that one. We'll take a look at the next one from Dream Angels 88 and Dead Zone 222. Pretty evenly matched for the most part. Queen's opening. This is called the Shigoran variation. I'm not too familiar with this variation. This is also sort of a delayed London system. Jobava London. I'm not sure why it's not saying Jobava London in the chat, but when you start with a queen's pawn opening and then you put your bishop on f4 and you have your knight on c3 in this way, it's a Jobava London system. I'm not sure why it's not showing that. Although this is not part of the Jobava London system, putting your pawn on f3 like this. Normally you want to develop your knight, develop this pawn, and then this bishop is going to go here, or even here potentially. And then you've got your knight's covering here and here. And then eventually with support, you can possibly push this pawn all the way here. So, and apply pressure. I know it looks weird because the pawn, the bishop, and the knight are all defending e4, but in some positions, if you can play it right, then you can get e4 in. So that's the idea anyway. And I suppose this move is maybe preparing e4. F3 is preparing e4 potentially. So we'll see what happens. Yeah. So e4 happens right away. You probably should have waited for e4 because you're not quite ready to push it all the way because you don't have enough support. If you count the pieces 1, 2, 3 versus 1, 2. So you're not defending it enough time, so you should not have pushed it yet. So you're losing a pawn. That's why black is winning by a full point here, because black is winning by a pawn after the exchange. So takes, 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 takes. And now your dead zone 222 is just winning by a full point in this position. That's the idea. But that's not what happens in the game. What happens in the game is the bishop slides back, then the knight moves up to b5, because the point is you're trying to attack this c7 pawn and create a fork. But you're checked, so you got to block the check. And then now you have a fork. Let's see if they see it. They don't see the fork. Yeah, I should have just pushed the pawn to e5 to get the fork. Oh, now they find it. And then takes, takes. Could have taken with the pawn there. Because the point is after takes, you've got to move the queen somewhere. Well, it's saying provide a check here first, and then you can attack this way. And then now you've got to move your queen out of the way, and then you're going to take. And I mean, you could try to develop this knight, but it's still winning for white because white's +3 in this position. So yeah, they exchange queens, and then they're going to take the rook, which is smart. And now they're +3. So +3 in this position still, compared to +3 in the other position that we looked at. So here it's just a matter of converting. Ooh, you had a, yeah. So you're attacking that knight, which is fine. But then you also have this fork that you missed. So there's another pawn fork, forking the rook and the knight, which was missed in the game. So takes, going after the knight again, going after the bishop this time. Black is going after white's rook. And that's a small inaccuracy because of your rook to c6 check, which was found in the game. And black is slightly for choice here. That is a fork temporarily, but not really, because white can just take, which is what happens in the game. That's the only winning move to avoid losing your own rook. And then takes. I'm not sure why white would take the bishop right away. It seems like you've got a good thing going on trying to get this other rook to c1 and maybe trade off the rooks first. But it makes sense to an extent to trade the knight for the bishop. And takes, now going after the undefended pawn, but the king can defend from behind. Now going after the rook this way. Usually you want to keep your king here to defend your own rook, because you want to get your rook on c1, because the c file is an open file. So get your rook to c1 and keep your king on b2 to defend your own rook. But the king is moving up on the board. Now the king goes back to b2. Now the knight wants to attack this undefended h3 pawn. I'm not sure why the king's going back to a1. So there goes the pawn. Attacking the rook. Takes. Going after the rook again. Check. And that pawn is not being defended, which is taken. And then going after the rook again. So the rook has to move. Now you can force a trade. This forces a trade because of the pin. And white is apparently not winning here. Maybe the point is that black can promote. So black is getting close to a pawn promotion. So if white doesn't play this right, white could lose. And it's also going to be very difficult to defend this pawn. Let's look how active black's king is. Black's king is extremely active, supporting this pawn and also going after this pawn. And white's king is not active at all. So it's going to be a tough position for white. So what happens in the game is going after that undefended pawn. Yeah, so black wants to promote. Check, check, check. That's a good move, and now black is ready to support this pawn. And you can see the engine likes black's chances of eventually getting a pawn to promote. Promotion. So you got to sacrifice the rook. Check. And now you would like to promote a pawn of your own, if possible. Which is not happening. The king is very active. And it's going to be difficult for white to win this. And white resigns. White's getting low on time, and they're also down by 3 points. So, good game. White had a lot of chances to win that game. We'll take a look at the next game. Paper Player 59 and Kaismar is rated over 800. Chess.com Elo over 800 for Paper Player 59 as well. Chess.com Elo, so both of these players are very evenly matched. We have a King's Pawn opening, Scandinavian from black, and it's kind of unusual to see the pawn being pushed this much. Like usually when you're playing the Scandinavian for black, yeah, like the engine is saying, you want to put this pawn on c5, and then you're controlling more of the center with this c pawn push. So pushing, very unusual Scandinavian from black. You don't see this type of Scandinavian very often. Takes, 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 check, and then the queen has to block. That's the only move. And the queen is going to take the undefended rook with check. Again, queen has to block. That's the only move. And then you could exchange queens, but exchanging queens is completely winning. But white takes the undefended pawn, and now white has a pawn on a2 that is a passed pawn and ready to promote. And check. Again, the only move, blocking with the queen. Takes, takes. Could have taken there again on d4. Then now they take on d4. And this is just completely winning for Paper Player 59. They're winning by 8 points here. And if you're black, you don't want to exchange pieces when you're already losing. So just something to keep in mind for the future. So now you only have a rook left after all those exchanges. And when the position simplifies, it's going to be harder for you to come back. So eventually white is able to get a resignation from Kaismar. So good game from both players. INGDA James 317349 and Jilly Bean as 541 on chess.com Elo. So this INGDA James, we've seen them before, but this Jilly Bean 541 is relatively new. So we haven't analyzed a lot of their games in recent memory. And we'll take a look at a Reti opening from I'm not sure if this ready opening. I'm not sure if I think if you put your pawn, if you put your knight on f3 right away, I think that's called a ready. Yeah, if you put your knight on f3 right away and instead of making any pawn moves, that's called a ready. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But it transposes into a King's Indian. So you've got your bishop on g2, and some inaccurate. Look at the analysis over here. Lots of inaccuracies because, like, normally you want to, if you go back, for example, the engine is saying to take because black is already applying pressure here, and black is also threatening this. And when black puts their pawn on e4, it's pretty uncomfortable. So, like, the engine is saying just what I said, pawn to e4. And now you're having to move your knight out of the way, and it's a very uncomfortable position. And that's not what happens in the game, but lots of inaccuracies here from both players. So we have takes, pushing the pawn. That's a good move because you're already defending e4 with your knight. And then takes. Probably want to take with the rook there, and then you can still castle kingside. So the engine is saying take with the queenside rook, which I agree with, and then you can develop your knight and your bishop and then castle kingside. And takes, check, block, takes. That pawn was undefended. Good job taking. And then that other pawn is undefended as well on e4, which is taken. And the rook is being undefended, which is taken. Well, now it's being... So, look, okay, if you go back, you can take the rook right away, and the rook is not being defended here. As soon as the king moves up to the 7th rank, then the rooks are connected and defending each other. So if you take the rook right away, then yes, you are losing this knight, but then you can just slide this. You want to slide this rook over to e1, and now you've got a very nice shish kebab pin against both bishops and the king. So it doesn't really matter which bishop moves, because whichever bishop does not move, you're going to take it. So I guess you could potentially go here to try to save this bishop, but then you're just going to push this knight out of the way. And then the knight has to move. And then as soon as the knight moves, then you're removing the defender and you're taking the undefended bishop on e5. So, and then if you don't want to do, if you just want to, like, if they move this bishop out of the way, like for safety, then you're just going to take this bishop. I mean, the engine says to put your other bishop on d5, which works because of the pin. The bishop can't actually move anywhere because of the pin, but you can also just take with check. And the king's going to move. And then the engine says you could take this knight if you want, which is a temporary sacrifice. But the point is that you've got two pieces hanging, but black can only take one piece. So if you take like this, then you're just going to slide your bishop back. And now you're going to win. So you have a nice pin here as well. So your next move is going to be knight to e4, and then you're going to pin the bishop. And you've got lots of good pressure here, pinning the bishop against the king. We have takes. Takes. You want to save the bishop because the bishop was being attacked there, and then that bishop can also take, and then your bishop is still being attacked by the rook. So that's a miss for black. So here's the point. You are attacking this black bishop, but after takes, takes, now you're losing this bishop, and then you're not winning by 3 points anymore. Now it's an even game. So and then also, instead of moving, if you are going to move the rook over, move this rook over instead. Because this rook is already on a really nice file, on the D file. And the D file is an open file, so you want your rooks on open files. Move this F1 rook over to E1. Because this F1 rook looks kind of sad right now. It's not on any open files, or semi-open files. Takes with check. Yeah, I'm not sure if black saw that, but the bishop was covering G8 already. So there's takes. Check. Yeah, you don't quite have a back rank checkmate because the knight is covering E8. It's getting close. There's check. And there's checkmate. There you go. Now you got checkmate. Very nice win for James 317, 349, and Michael Keaton. Batman 1989. Next we have Viper Active 007 and INGDA Vincent JK 2011. King's opening this time. And Sicilian Defense from black. So you can take the knight, which is what happens. Okay, so there's a lot going on here. So the point is that you actually want to defend with the bishop. And then after takes, you know, your pawn structure is not messed up. Your knight can still develop later. So the point is that once you develop this way, now if you take, you're just losing a bishop for a knight. And usually bishops are a tiny bit stronger than knights in most positions. It depends on the position. They're each 3 points apiece, technically, but you could almost value a bishop at 3.5 points in most positions. It really depends on the position. In very open positions, you want bishops for sure. In closed positions, knights are a little bit better than bishops. And this is still even, but the queen's not in any danger, even though the queen's been activated so early in the game. And now you can't move your knight, because if you move your knight, you're losing your queen, because the knight is pinned against the queen. So the engine says this is a missed move, though, because the better move according to the engine is this. And the point is that after takes, you take with the pawn, and then the queen's going to go here to deliver a check, and you're going to block. And then this knight is hanging, so it has to move. And you can take, you can castle or take, and this is just a little bit better position. But the engine says it's a missed win or a missed opportunity, but it's really a pretty good move because you're going to win a minor piece. And takes. You could have taken the bishop there, simplified the position. Takes. Queen is going after the undefended b pawn. Ah, they find the move, but the point is that you could like try to go after the knight this way, but you're getting white doesn't have to worry about the b2 pawn yet because you're getting checked, and the king is going to move up, and then the knight is just going to go back, and then now not only are you hitting the queen, but you're also defending this. So the queen has to move, and you're not worried about losing b2 anymore, which was undefended because your knight's serving the dual purpose of defending b2 and hitting the queen. So fancy little variation there. Check. Going after the bishop. Takes. That's a good move because you're threatening checkmate in one move. And the engine is saying it's a brilliant move because you're losing your rook. But now you just have checkmate in one move. So that's why you can't take the rook. But blocking the checkmate, going back, and now you're still getting checkmated. So I don't think Vincent JK 2011 quite saw the checkmate there. Good game from both players. We'll take a look at the last game between Doyle JD and Kai Sparks. And they both had some inaccuracies and misses in this game. They were at 68%. They were both in the 60s. So we'll take a look. That's a sacrifice, and that's losing because you're just sacrificing a minor piece for a pawn. But then they took back with the rook for some reason, and then the knight is there to take the rook. So white still has some chances here because it's technically an even position in terms of material. And black is just happy to shuffle the rook here. And there goes the pawn. And there goes the knight. Black is just shuffling while white is gobbling up some pieces. There goes the rook. There goes the bishop. They're going to take. But by this point, white is already winning by 10 points. So it looks like white should win this game no problem because they're winning by a lot. You could have just taken the knight there instead of moving the rook over. And now you can take the knight again. And the pawn can't take the pawn because it's pinned. The rook was pinning the pawn. And then, ooh, oh boy, this is crazy. You've got a royal fork. And then the pawn is forking the king and the queen. Takes, 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 takes. This is completely winning. That's the variation to go for. But that's not what happened in the game. What happened in the game was check. Yeah, you don't want to take with the queen. It's better to take with the bishop. I mean, I guess if you take with the bishop, then you're losing your queen this way anyway, but it doesn't really matter because the queen is pinned in both directions here. So since the queen is pinned in both directions, it's tough. Takes, 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 queen, but not quite checkmate. There are lots of opportunities to deliver checkmate, but it doesn't quite happen. You got to be really careful not to stalemate your opponent here. This is checkmate in one move. Queen to e8, and the king has nowhere to go because the queen is covering all of these squares. And then once you put your queen on e8, then your queen is covering all of these squares, and that's a back rank checkmate. So the problem is what happened in the game is queen to d7. And this is a stalemate because it's Black's turn to move, but they have no legal moves. So it ends up as a draw. And this is why you don't resign, especially against middle-rated players, because there's always a chance for a draw, even if you're losing by 25 points, which in this case Doyle was losing by 25 points, but they still were able to get a draw out of it with a little bit of luck. So good game from both players. And that'll wrap up the analysis for the Stride K12 Esports League Week 5 of the regular season. And have a good rest of your day. Bye.